I mean, again, this another thing I wanted to reference while we're talking about this. Yeah, it's quite comical, really. The organisation called Positive Money you mentioned. What's the guy's name?
The founder, Ben Dyson.
Ben Dyson, yeah. He's managing to break into the mainstream. I think he got an interview on Radio 4.
Yes,
but
BBC.
I mean, it's almost comical, the fact that he's got to go on to Radio 4 and tell people how money is created, because it's another barrier to sort of trying to make people aware is that these things seem so simple, or money, like surely money isn't created any way than I think it is. It's the fundamentals, because no one wants to believe that what they're told is fundamentally wrong.
This is about
they know
faith.
That everyone will say politicians lie, everyone will say don't believe what you read in the newspapers, but they're not acting on that. It's like, what did Jack Fresco say? Christianity is a good idea. When are we going to start practicing it? Yeah, or Gandhi, I think Gandhi said Western civilization is a good idea, or similar quote. It's just that kind of mental barrier. Now, I would say probably psychology is something I did study it, and I've read quite a lot of books, and I think there's a psychological angle, obviously, as well. But
this is, I think, something important, and I think that the mainstream, the I would say those who run society in a way are doing an excellent job in restricting people's point of view. In a way, there's not only two answers. There's not just A or B. There's the full spectrum from A to Z.
The bigger picture.
But their job, this manufacturing consent and shaping public perception, is really to narrow down people's thoughts, and ability to think outside the box, and making them, imagine and think and be creative and think, maybe it's not just A or B, we can also do H or or W, and that's how one of the tenets of power and the foundation of power really restrict the ability of people to think about other options, because when you then speak to people, then they say, of course you're right, I never thought about it.
I hardly get anyone actually disagreeing with what I say. They just don't know, they don't really have any reaction to it. I've stopped so many conversations because we're having a conversation, then I go off on something that I've heard or read, and then there's nothing back, nothing comes back. But while you were talking manufacturing consent, a book and a documentary by Chomsky. Yeah. What I was going to say earlier, when we talked about the rich and the poor, John Pilger, journalist I really respect, Australian journalist, he's made 20, 30 documentaries, probably more. He did one called War by Other Means, and maybe that's another thing we can talk about, is these loans which come from the World Bank,
the IMF,
to third world countries. But I think it's this film, he talks about, how is this for an irony? They had I can't remember the name, Conference for the Poor, what would it be called? Summit.
A summit.
Poor Summit, Summit for the Poor, something like that. And it was
they call them developing countries, or they give a positive spin.
I think they actually used the word poverty.
All right.
Yeah, Poverty Summit, something like that. Anyway, and it was in Bangkok, Thailand. And in the film, he details that obviously it's a plush 5-star hotel, obviously, you can't have it in anyone's...
It's all about poverty after all,
you can't hold it in like my living room, obviously. But even more ironic is that anyone who's been to Bangkok will know that the gap between rich and poor literally is huge in one respect, but geographically you can have a huge hotel right next to a slum, and it's kind of sickening. You can look out the window and you can actually see those two worlds existing right next to each other. Anyway, there was a slum area right next to the hotel or the conference hall where this was taking place. And they put a huge barrier up to shield the delegates from the poor people.
So that they couldn't see the poor, actually.
I don't
out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, I don't mean to laugh. I'm only laughing because of the ridiculous irony of it. It's just... The poor have got nothing to do with this summit. And who knows what deals are done in this summit, and what kind of cronyism goes on, because of course, again, most people believe that even the leader of America, leader of Russia, leader of China, okay, they're enemies and they could potentially blow each other up. But who knows what the real relationship is between Obama, Putin, and I don't know who the Chinese leader is, but who knows what it is. I mean, again, cronyism is another thing which people don't accept. They don't realise that all these big boys...
Maybe working together.
Yeah, they may be working together. But one thing that... Because what I think is that this sort of alternative information is gradually getting through. Like, we've had Snowden, we've had Syria... And again, Syria is... I mean, I do follow mainstream news because I'm of the view that I quite like to know what people are being fed. So rather than ignoring it completely, I do a little comparison, and I like to know what people are being fed. But
and before that, there was the economic hitman, John Perkins in the United States, explaining actually
if you want to talk about that would be
with regime change, etc. Just brief mention that this man used to work for the American government, and he defines himself as an economic hitman, meaning someone who's sent by the American government to destabilize certain countries if they don't comply with Uncle Sam requests, meaning let our corporations in, let our eliminate unions, remove any trade barriers, and let us have our way and exploit your resources, and and leave you basically with a pittance, with nothing. And if you don't comply, well, they send these economic hitmen. Initially, they try to coerce you, to corrupt you, in a way, and then eventually, as he said, they send in the jackals. If you like Manuel Trujillo, I think, and other leaders in Latin America, they didn't comply. And they were killed. Actually, their planes, their jets were blown up by terrorists. How to say groups within the U.S. That
lots
do
of
this
plane
kind
crashes.
of operation. So this is another way, because you mentioned the IMF and all these organizations who actually are part of this I would say modus operandi.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the Pilger one, again, it's called War by Other Means. And again, another thing which I think the mainstream never covers is economic terrorism or economic slavery. Slavery as a name has been abolished, yes, but economic slavery is just crippling. And John Perkins basically says... I don't know, was he working for the government or was he working for a corporation, or was it?
I think he worked for both, but when he was involved in this kind of operations, it was more like government. I don't know exactly if he was part of the CIA, but somehow in connection, or maybe he was working for a corporation that was closely connected with the CIA.
But obviously he's working in the American government's interests. Yeah,
he used to. Yeah.
And I mean, again, let's just break it down to simple terms. If you're the leader of a third world country and someone comes to you and says, "We want to give you this loan. We're going to make you very comfortable, but it will mean selling out your people," and your country. Can you give me an example? One of the countries.
Your resources. You mean in Latin America?
Or in John Perkins, can you give me an example of one of the countries?
Panama,
and
Honduras
Guatemala as well.
And Guatemala,
yeah. So, okay, you're the leader of Panama, was Noriega, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. He's going to be tempted to say, fine, I'm going to be fine, I'm going to be rich,
And that's a good example. Noriega is someone who actually played ball, and he was a CIA agent. He fully complied up to a certain point with the US. But I don't remember if this Manuel Trujillo was from Panama or from another state.
Well, Noriega was Panama.
But I think that Perkins mentioned specifically maybe Arbenz in Guatemala. There are a couple of people that he got to visit personally, actually, to make them these proposals they couldn't refuse. But Noriega certainly in Panama was, I think, after they killed the non-compliant one, then they installed Noriega. Probably that's how it went.
Right. Okay. Yes.
Manuel Noriega was I would say CIA asset, like the way they call it. But let's just focus, on the country.